Hi guys, how's it going? Welcome to week 12, I guess via YouTube video. Miss you guys, first and foremost. Hope you're home staying safe and out of people's way and practicing social distancing. Like I said, it's kind of odd to do this solo without the class in front of me and our usual banter and discussions back and forth, but I'm just going to go ahead and attempt to complete drawings 25, 26, 27 in our workbook. And these are very simple because we have our instructions from our DDS or other laboratory to our left, and we need to transpose these instructions onto our dentagram. There is an order of operations, so even though the listing is usually from major connector to denture base retention, I would usually start off with the denture base retention, and here it's talking about mesh retention in the posterior, and I'll check each one off as I go through. Normally I would start off by outlining the dentulous areas, and once again these are going to be a lattice mesh retention in the posterior for an acrylic denture base. I would go and start by drawing the external finishing line. And this is replacing 4, 5, 6. And symmetrically on the other side with no straight lines, some gentle curves, roughly the lingual gingival margin of 4, 5, 6, 7. And we've outlined already here mesh retention in the posterior. The type of occlusion is secondary. The type of teeth is secondary. The shade is secondary. This is just framework design, substructure design. In the anterior here, we got something called high lingual backing in the anterior. Usually when there's no room interocclusally in the anterior for the mesh retention and the external finishing line and the acrylic denture base, usually someone's overclosed, we could do a metal backing, so to speak. And the lingual of these anterior teeth will be an alloy. So I'm going to maybe 3/4 of the lingual side somewhat illustrate number 1, 2, and 1, 2 on the first and second quadrant. And then we can lightly shade this in if we wish. So the lingual of these anterior teeth are going to be in a metal denture base. So here I have an example to kind of, it's a two-dimensional drawing, we'll do it in 3D, where we've done the lingual here in a metal chromium cobalt denture base. Now the anterior, it could be no flange or with a flange. Here we've done radica on these front 4 teeth, they're not even denture teeth. It's all composite resin buildup. But like I said, this is substructure. Whether or not we do a flange, or whether or not we do it in a denture tooth or a radica or any other kind of composite material, or we're going to opaque it, that'll be secondary. But for the drawing purposes, we're going to illustrate our metal backings as such. I'm going to move into, I'll keep into the step 2 would be the direct retainers. So here we have roach clasps or Y clasps on 1, 3, and 2, 3. Again, it doesn't say the depth of the undercut. That would be determined by surveying. This is just a two-dimensional illustration of the treatment plan. But it should be somewhat accurate that these roach clasps are, roughly 3 to 5 millimeters below the labial margin and enter the carriage about a prosthetic tooth posterior to this. So we've got to simulate a 4, a 5, and a 6. This would enter the carriage here, the denture base, between number 4 and number 5. And again, it's something three-dimensional that we're drawing in 2D fashion. We've got mesial occlusal rests in the posterior. Here, we've got apron rests on the canine. And this height of the apron will be determined on the occlusion of the opposing. We don't know what it is, but we are illustrating that this tooth is plated at the back. Whether this apron is higher or lower in reality would be secondary to the drawing. If it's something really tight, then I guess we could write here, please, ensure clearance for occlusion from opposing, 3-3 and 4-3. On the posterior section here, as well as saying hairpin clasps on the mesial buccal of 1-7 and 2-7. Now, these types of clasps aren't popular at all, but this is an academic institution here at the school, so we need to cover whatever may come your way. I think if the undercut is at the mesial buccal, probably a ring clasp would be more prudent. But we need to, illustrate our double backing of this hairpin clasp or reverse action clasp as such. And then I'm going to move on to, here we have a friend. A furry friend has come into the picture. I think I'm going to rename these cats Ashley and Carrie, since I miss them as well. Okay, cats, you are Ashley and you are Carrie. And they're cool cats anyway, so I think they're fitting names now. Just renamed the kittens Ashley and Carrie. I think he just gave me a look like Carrie would give me. But let's move on here now. Where was I? Hairpin clasp. Let's check off each one. Apron, mesial occlusal rest. And then the last one is the horseshoe major connector. I would always leave major connector to the last. Major connector would be the last thing in my order of operations for illustrations. And here, a horseshoe connector. Now, we're just going to roughly draw the horseshoe connector so it looks like a horseshoe, depending on the depth of the palate, the type of tissue is back here, or the patient's previous appliance, or wherever the floor of the mouth is. This should cross at 90 degrees. If I was to kind of superimpose, 90 degrees, it should cross the midline at 90 degrees and should cross the midline at the flattest, deepest part of the palate. But like I said, for illustrative purposes, we can try to manage that. Try to be careful. Some of us aren't the most Picassos of illustrations, but the most clear the drawing is, it almost eliminates the need for reading the instructions on the side. I think they would be more to kind of reinforce what the drawing is. But, our end goal is that the instructions meet the drawings, will meet the model. And if these three things, there's something kind of awry, then we need to go back and talk to the dentist and ask for clarification of the instructions. And this is not a fantasy to say that in reality in the workplace, there's huge gaps in the instructions. There's huge gaps in the instructions from laboratory to another laboratory. So at least as a bare minimum from this class here, Dent 2004, you're going to graduate with complete competency in treatment planning, illustratively, and surveying of the model. Whether or not the casting is carried out, whether or not the patient's compliance with the prosthetic is high or low, whether the aesthetics are acceptable or not to the practitioner and or the client. I think that's secondary from this program right here. Here we need to at least backfill the basics that there would be no problem in instructions, in drawings, in surveying and design, and providing the product to its completeness of the framework design. So let's go on to number 26. And here we have, again, I'm going to start with the denture base. And this is mesh retention of the lower. The external finishing lines on a lower are straight down from the guide plane of the most terminal end abutments. And then this also mesh lattice retention on the posterior would finish roughly at the deepest part of the dentulous area, or sometimes, maybe to be cavalier, that would probably be the end of the prosthetic 3-6 and 4-6. Once we go beyond the 6, we're into an inclined plane up to the retromolar pad, this is going to be limited in space interocclusally and vertically. If I was to superimpose the denture base on top, and then we can superimpose 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, depending on the opposing dentition. If it's a full denture in combination case, or is it a full dentate opposing. I mean, this is, again, secondary to the framework design if we're going to drop a bicuspid or have a full complement of posterior teeth. Naturally, if the antagonistic teeth go all the way to 7 or 8, then I think it would be prudent to have something antagonist to those fixed clinical crowns as to avoid any kind of disruption in interocclusal instability. My next thing here is we had something here called the horizontal shoe extension, which we've talked about many times. I'm thinking the classic horizontal shoe extension, which would be a rest just distal to the terminal abutment 3-3 and 4-3. This is a tissue stop here I'm talking at the back. But this horizontal shoe extension maintains the depth and the width of the guide plane. I think technically if we made our horizontal shoe extension come all the way down here to create a more finished line, so to speak, between the intaglio surface, between the acrylic and the chromium cobalt frame, I think that would be probably a little bit more technically more pleasing and even better. But textbook, horizontal shoe extension, 2 millimeter square, obviously depending on the size of the clinical crown, but within the confines of the occlusion of the posterior teeth, I would say the width of the occlusal surface of 3-4 and 4-4. And then post retention in the anterior. So here we're saying we're going to have a metal denture base in the anterior. So here's a post, and there is no acrylic denture base in the anterior. It is, however, wise probably to have some sort of acrylic denture base in the anterior to easier for additions and relines of this anterior segment, especially when the labial-lingual width of the anterior edentulous ridge becomes very narrow. So your retention grids, labial-lingual, are very narrow, or very few, sometimes only one. And with the resorption of the mandible, somewhat 2-3 times of the maxilla due to the composition of the quality of the bone, we have a more resorption in the anterior, causing for these prosthetic teeth to be 12, 13, 14 millimeters in length. If we look at some lower anterior denture molds, we can see that they're even devised with huge, longer ridge laps. I mean, even in this mold here, L37N from Vita's MFT line, they have a larger ridge lap to compensate for the resorption aesthetically that we can match the adjacent teeth. So if we can at all times try to put an acrylic denture base in the anterior, as well as a post retention, as well as a diagnostic setup to have these teeth encased with the post inside the prosthetic crown 3141. So therefore, our treatment plan now goes backwards to an aesthetic try-in first before the framework. I think study models are always a more prudent way to go. Even aesthetic try-ins in the aesthetic zone of the anterior is way better results of the prosthetics. So when we are in our laboratories, in our work placements, in our workplaces, when we see the practitioner, giving us an algin impression, going straight to try-in without any kind of prosthetic alterations, without any clinical crown alterations, without any rest preps, without any diagnostic setups, no bite registrations, and we're going straight to a try-in, this is really taking about 3 steps out of the way. Can it happen? Yes. But when something goes wrong, we're going backwards. We're going sometimes backwards all the way to the diagnostic bite registration. Whether that bite registration is a centric occlusion registration or whether that bite registration is centric relation registration, sometimes we need that in advance I shouldn't say sometimes, we always need that in advance. So we can have the occlusal scheme somewhat designed. If it's a class 1, class 2, overclosure, it's a crossbite, and then we can design our substructure and our post locations appropriately to satisfy that occlusion. And our prosthetic teeth, therefore increasing the retention of those prosthetic teeth, and then obviously ultimately increasing the longevity of the prosthetic, increasing the lifespan of the remaining dentition. Now here, kind of semantics, we have 4 lower anterior teeth left. Would the acrylic partial denture or transitional acrylic partial be fine? Assuming that what we know about tooth loss, the clinical crown to tooth to root ratio of laterals of the lower are not the greatest. We have adjacent tooth loss on both sides. We've got huge bone loss, I'm sure. I'm just generalizing. That most likely the laterals are next to go. If we can hang on to the canines, great. If we hang on to them with the chromium cobalt, we're still aproning, as we are in this diagram. If we're hanging on with acrylic partial, we're still aproning, so we're covering these free gingival margins anyways. So you decide how we're going to practice with the practitioners. Now that may sound weird for some. He's like, whoa, hang on a second. I'm going to decide how I'm going to practice with my professional counterparts. Isn't it their job to kind of come up with a treatment plan? Yes, but the more information they have, technically, from their laboratory, will help them achieve a higher standard of prosthetics. I believe so. And in the marketplace still, I see practitioners leaning more and more heavily on the laboratory for advice in treatment planning, whether that be implants, cast partials especially, or any other type of prosthetic. Orthodontics, not so much. For appliance design, that is. They have it in their mind of what they need. So we've got lingual apron is the final thing here with our 4 guide planes. And the lingual apron here. A classic design here, I would think. Can you have a strengthener for a lower, an acrylic denture base? Sure. Can you have an interrupted apron to have more acrylic in the anterior? Sure. But I'm thinking this would be more mainstream. You know, here at school, we're always kind of stuck between, well, is that what's going on in the marketplace? Is that mainstream? Or is this some academia from 1962 as our horizontal shoe extensions or our old-fashioned ones? Or is this something that's nouveau? You know, at the school, we're always trapped between something we need to know, something we should know, and something we want to know. And I try through all these drawings to kind of disseminate and navigate through the sea of what's old, what's new, what's really coming. So we kind of, when I say classic design, this is what you'd see in the marketplace. Can it be different? Sure. Is the end result going to change? Not in this design. Let's move on to the last one. If you have any questions with any of these designs, feel free to email me, or you can even send a picture of your drawings if you have some things to clarify, and then snap off for your phone and email it to me. And then I'll just get back to you as soon as I can and say, yeah, we can correct it. I may even correct it and get it back to you. I'll take a picture of mine again. And I think these are posted on Blackboard already. If not, then they probably will be the final ones. Let's start with the denture base here again. So we got mesh retention here with acrylic denture base on this side. And on this side, the external finishing line is different. And the reason I did this one here is to show you that, well, should I have draw the external finishing line all the way around? Yeah, but this is an upper. And here now, I'm like, if it was a lower, I'm coming straight down. An upper, I need to have that external finishing line all the way around to the back of the free end, like a full denture would be covered. I mean, obviously not on the hamular notch. Even though there may be no dentate occlusion or prosthetic occlusion all the way back, the tuberosities are completely covered with acrylic. All the edentulous areas covered with acrylic, as in the lower above, but not necessarily a denture tooth is there or not. Again, this is not denture occlusion here. This is framework design. So there's high linguals again, just to practice that one more time. Metal backings for our laterals up here. And this is, again, somewhat of a classic design, because when we have low interocclusal space, I mean, the last thing we want to do is put on a mesh retention, and then that lateral be popping off through centric occlusion or excursions. And then they're back at the laboratory or back at the dental office, which is the back of the laboratory, to repair 1, 2, and 2, 2. Let's start with the mesial occlusal rest here on 1-7 and with an Akers class. Doesn't say where the undercut is, so again, usually on the distal buccal, if it's not suggested where it go. And then we've got I bar. Again, red for retentive, blue for passive parts, just to go over what we've been reinforcing all year. And we have aproning of the anterior. Now, just to go over this again, maybe from several weeks ago, when we have an anterior modification, we need to have a minimum of a mesial or distal lingual rest, a cingulate rest, or a plating of some kind to close off these guide planes. So here we're going to plate 1, 3, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then it says closed oval design. Again, this is just on paper. We don't know the length of this full palate or posterior palatal strap of the closed oval. But most of you on the midterm did a good job drawing these. And on our final exam, we'll have some with some instructions and some without. I was anticipating all without, but with our distance these last several weeks going to finish off the semester, we don't have the quality of time together to go over those drawings completely together. So I'm going to, I don't want to say soften it, but we'll reinforce the previous 7 weeks as well. So there you have it, drawings number 25, 26, 27, and a lot of diatribe in between. Again, always visualize that there's an acrylic denture base here, there's a lateral here. Whether that's acrylic denture base in the anterior or not, we don't know. And there's the acrylic denture base there. Thank you.